Hey YouTube, I'm going to do a lecture on React. I'm going to talk about Introduction to React and build our first React application. Before I begin, the way this lecture is built is we're going to talk about a few topics about React, and then we're going to do exercises on the topic that we talk about. So whenever you see an exercise slide, feel free to stop the video and try it yourself. You have the solution to the exercise at the same slide. Okay, so my name is, you have my details here in the slide. My name is Yariv Katz. You have my LinkedIn and my email. Feel free to email me on any questions you have. And okay, let's begin. A few words about myself. I've been a full stack developer for the past 16 years. Currently I founded my company called Nerdies, where we do software solutions and consulting. We do also a lot of React. You have more details in our website, nerdies.com. So let's begin. Okay, so this is what we will cover in this lecture. We're going to talk about React and some tools we use with React development. We're going to do a small Hello World demo. We're going to talk about a React component, properties, events, and state of a React component. And we're going to do, we talk about Redux, which is an application architecture used for developing React application. And we're going to use React and Redux to build a small application that displays movie details. Okay, about React.js. React is an open source library and it's maintained by Facebook. React is designed to be the view and a model view control application. Since we want to create complex web application, we can't really create it with just a view. So we use application architecture design like Flux or Redux and combine with React, and together we can create powerful applications. Flux is application architecture design that's created by Facebook, and Redux is based on Flux and becoming much more popular today and is approved by Facebook. React has a very small footprint and React is very fast. One of the reasons that React is fast is due to the VirtualDOM. React actually optimized the read and write actions to the DOM using VirtualDOM. React is production ready and is used by many companies in production. You can see here I listed a few companies that use React in production, but there are much more. You can check React website to see the full list of companies that use React. Let's talk about the virtual DOM. One of the reasons that React is so fast is because of the virtual DOM. Writing directly to the DOM is expensive, and writing to a JavaScript object is much faster. So basically React Virtual DOM is a JavaScript object. React reads only from the Virtual DOM, which keeps in sync with the actual DOM. And React writes to the Virtual DOM, which is fast, and the Virtual DOM is in charge of updating the actual DOM. And it does that in a smart way, which means it updates the minimum changes it needs to keep the DOM in sync with the Virtual DOM. Let's try and explain the notion with a small diagram. On the left side, we have other frameworks. Other frameworks, you write the JavaScript code and the framework writes and reads directly to the DOM, which is quite expensive. With React, you have your code which writes and reads directly from the Virtual DOM. The Virtual DOM then writes to the DOM, but it writes only the changes. So the write is the minimal time that needs to update the DOM. The code you're about to see in this video might look a bit different than the JavaScript code you are used to. It is common in React to develop using ECMAScript 6. ECMAScript is a scripting language specification, and as of today, ECMAScript 6 is the new version. As you can see from the table, the new desktop browsers support most of the features in ECMAScript. Unfortunately, the mobile browser do not support so much the feature in the ECMAScript 6. So to keep support for older browsers, we use transpilers like Babel. We will cover Babel in the next few slides. Another tool that is highly used in React development is JSX. JSX stands for JavaScript as XML, and it allows us to add HTML-like syntax in our JavaScript files. We're going to use JSX and ES6, and together with Babel, we're going to transform our code into something that is supported across different browsers. Word of warning, there's some tools that are very highly recommended, and we don't use in today's code since they are out of scope for this video. One of those tools is Webpack. Webpack takes all our project files and outputs a single minified project file. You can also integrate Babel and support JSX inside your Webpack. So it's highly recommended. Also, there are a few other tools that are highly recommended, and in general, this video is meant for educational purposes and don't follow all the best practices. So when you start writing your React app, I recommend using one of the starter kits out there. You can just go to Google and write React Redux starter kit and start from there. Let's check out a small example of code written with JSX and with ES6 and all transpiled with Babel. So on the left side, you have a JavaScript code without JSX. And you see we use here regular React methods, React create class, and we have in a create class we can have an object with a method render, and it's very similar to the old JavaScript that we're used to program in. And on this side we have JavaScript code with JSX, and you can see it's pretty similar to the left side. The only difference is we can, instead of using React create element, we can actually use return and put HTML-like syntax inside the return. So we're actually returning in brackets a div hello dev geek week. And on the bottom side is a combination of ES6 and JSX. And here it's much similar to the object-oriented programming languages that we're used to, like Java. We have a class definition, our name of the class. What our class extends is it extends React component, and it's actually very similar to static languages like Java. And inside our class we have a method called render, and inside a render we can return JSX HTML syntax, and we have a return brackets and div hello dev geek week. So you can see the difference between the old way we wrote JS code and the new way. The new way is much cleaner, much more easier to create object-oriented component inheritance and stuff we are used to from Java. So after you get used to the ES6 and JSX is pretty comfortable way to write code. So we talked a bit about React and the tools we commonly used in React development. So let's build our first React component. To build a React component, you simply need to extend React component, and you also need to implement the render method inside your component. Now, the render method can return a JSX element, which represents the HTML of the component. So in this example, we have a component which outputs hello dev geek week. Okay, let's try and implement what we learned so far by creating our first React component. So I recommend you stop the video and you try and do this task. This task is to make a simple React component, a hello world simple React component. You have the full solution and the URL you see in the slide. You just need to go to the master branch and and after you finish, you can continue the video and we will go over the solution. Okay, let's check our hello world React component. So we created two files here, an index file and the JavaScript component file. So in the index file, we're including React library and React DOM library. React DOM is in charge of rendering React into the DOM. And also beneath it, we have Babel core. So it can transform our ES6 code to something that different browsers can understand. And we're also including our JavaScript code where we are creating our component. In our body, there is simply a div with ID of example. Let's check our JavaScript code. So in the JavaScript code, we created a class with the name of our component. And that class extends React component. And we have a render method which returns a JSX of div hello world. And we're using React DOM to render our component. And we're going to render our component inside the example div we defined in the index HTML file. So okay, let's check out how it looks in the browser. So this is the result of the component we built. You can see hello world is printed on the browser. In fact, the entire JSX we put in the render method of our component is inserted into the example div. Okay, let's talk about properties. A React component, when created, can get properties, which is a good way to pass data to a React component. So in the exercises we created a hello dev geek week React component. And if we want to pass properties to that component, all we have to do is add an attribute of the property name. We call it the greeting here, and give it a value. And we give it a value of hello dev geek week. And on the component side, if we want to access the properties, we have the properties in this, so we can call this.props dot name of the property. So to access it, all we need to do is this.props.greeting, and we can access the string that we passed when we created a component. So passing properties is pretty simple and a pretty cool way to pass data in our React component. Okay, let's add a React component property to the hello world component we created earlier. So open your React component project and add a greeting property to our hello dev geek week component. The component should print the text it gets in the greeting. So stop the video and try to do it yourself. You have the solution in the branch feature greeting prop. Okay, so we are talking about React components and we're talking about passing properties to a React component. So to call a component, as we saw before, we just use the name of the component. And now we are passing a greeting property, which is like passing like HTML attribute with passing a greeting property. And the value of that property is hello. And inside our component, inside our hello dev geek week component, we use the property by referencing this.props.greeting. So the result of passing a property greeting hello and printing it in our component would look similar like this. You see our component, instead of hello, the hello world message before, it prints the string we passed in the property. Okay, let's talk about events. A lot of time we need to add like a button click or phone submit, some kind of DOM event. So you can very simply define it in your React component. Just go in your render function. There is your JSX code, and you can just add event as an attribute to your component DOM representation. And here you have an example of render method, which returns div with a button, and the button has an onClick event. And the onClick event is attached to a method, this.alertHello, which is defined, the alert hello will be defined in our component. So this way, whenever a user clicks the button, we activate a method in our component called alert hello. Let's try to do a small exercise on React component events. In your hello world component, add a button and a click event to the button. The click event should show an alert with hello world text, and you have the solution in the branch feature React events. So stop the video and try it now. So this is the solution for the events exercise. You can see the hello dev geek week component we created in the previous exercises. So in the render method of this component, we add a button, and our button has an onClick event. The onClick event will activate an alert hello method in our component, and this is the alert hello method. The alert hello method will simply print alert box with hello world, and let's see how it looks in the browser. You have an alert button, you click it, and you have hello world. So this is the exercise for events. Let's talk about state of a React component. React component need to know when they need to re-render. So the components are connected to a state, and when the state changes, the component re-renders. React component have a function called getInitialState, and you can override that function to set the initial state of a component. With ECMAScript 6, you need to set the initial state in the constructor. You can reference the state by calling this.state, and also you can change the state by calling this.setState. Important to note that components can change the state in their render function. We're going to do a small exercise on React component state. We're going to add a state to our hello world component, and the state we're going to add is called isGreetingShown. When the state value is equal to true, we will show the greeting. Otherwise, if it's equals to false, we will hide the greeting. And we have the button we created earlier. So when the user clicks the button, we will use this.setState to toggle our isGreetingShown state, Boolean state variable. So you have the solution for this exercise in the branch feature states. Good luck. Okay, so let's go over and state exercise solution. We have the component we created previously, our hello world component. And what we want to do is initiate our state for that component. So we're doing that in the constructor. So the first time the constructor calls the super constructor, and then we're initiating our state. So we're putting in this.state, we're putting an object. The object has one of our state that's called isGreetingShown, and that's a Boolean value that's initiated to true. We're also binding a component method, toggleGreeting. We're binding to this, since we want this to be available in the toggleGreeting method. This way, our toggleGreeting method, which is activated when you push the button, can call this.setState. SetState is available in this, and by binding this, we can call this.setState in our toggleGreeting function. And this.setState simply puts in the isGreetingShown state, put the not value of the current state of isGreetingShown. Now let's check our component render method. So the first line determines the text on the button. As you recall, the text on the button should change from hide to show. So we're putting a hide greeting text, and if our state isGreetingShown is false, we're going to put the message show greeting. And we're going to put that inside our button as the text in our button. As you can recall, you can easily inject inside your JSX, you can easily inject JavaScript variables using opening bracket and closing bracket and the name of the variable. We're also putting in the button onClick event, which calls the toggleGreeting method. The next block of code puts inside our JSX, it puts a function. We're defining here a function. This defines a function, and we're calling the function we define. In this function, we're checking the state isGreetingShown, and we're returning the greeting if the isGreetingShown is true. Okay, so let's see how it looks in the browser. Let's refresh. You see hide greeting and hello, and I'm clicking the hide greeting, and the greeting disappears. Clicking the show greeting, you can see the greeting is shown. In the beginning of the lecture, we explained what is React, and we said it is used only for the view, only for the UI. So the question we are asking now is, how can I build a full-scale large web application with React? So there's something we're missing, and we have to use some sort of application architecture design. So what is Redux? Redux is an application architecture commonly used for building client-side web applications. It's not only working with React, Redux can also be used with other frameworks like AngularJS. Similar to Flux, React keeps a unidirectional data flow. I will explain what is unidirectional data flow in the next slides. Basically, Redux has three principles. The first one is we have one single source of truth. We have the state of the app, that's our source of truth, and it's located in our store. State is read-only and can only be changed by actions. Changes to the states are executed by pure functions called reducers. Reducers take the action and the payload from the action, and from that information decide what the next state will look like. Let's talk about Redux, how it works, and about the unidirectional data flow. To understand how Redux works, it's best shown with a diagram. Redux, similar to Flux, works in a unidirectional data flow. And what that means is we have in our app components. The components can trigger actions. The actions will send a type of action and a payload to the store. The store then, using the reducers, will decide based on the action sent what the next state should look like. And after that, components that have a state connected and that state is changed will re-render. So you can compare that to two-way binding. Like unidirectional data flow is we have a single flow. You have a component using action change the state, and this is returning in all the app. This is the direction. While in other frameworks, they use two-way binding. Two-way binding, you have like a UI that is changing scope variable in the controller. There are a lot of criticism about this way, since sometimes you change variable that will affect the scope variables in a controller, and that can affect many models and many things will change in the view, and it's hard to keep track of all the things that might change in a two-way binding. So when you get used to this kind of flow, your app becomes much more cleaner. You have components, the components are connected to the state they need, and they re-render based on the state that is changing. Okay, we will now build a small movie application using React and Redux. Our app will display information about movies. We will have a search box for searching movies, and when the user clicks on search, it will query the Open Movie Database API and display the information on the movie it found. Okay, the Open Movie Database API, you have a URL, you have the term of the search, and this is how you query the database, and it returns a JSON object. So let's build a first React Redux movie app. When you design your app with Redux, you need to start looking at your app as a state machine. We talked about that Redux has a single source of truth, the state of the app, which is located in the store. So in our movie app, how will our state machine look like? How will our state look, what action we will have, and what state will change from each action? Let's try and think about it in the next slide. So this is how our movie app state machine will look like. At the beginning, we have the initial state of the app. So at the initial state of the app, we have a loading flag, which is set to false. The loading flag is set to true when we call the Open Movie Database API, and we are waiting for the response from the server. So at the initial state, this flag is set to false, and the movie object will get the movie objects from the Open Movie Database API. So at the beginning, it's set that our movies object are set to null. We have a search clicked action, which means when the user fill in the search term and then click the search button, then we have a search clicked action. The search click action sends us to the loading state. The loading state, we have the loading flag set to true, which means we are sending the request for the Open Movie Database API, and we are waiting for the response from the server. So the loading flag is set to true, and we still didn't get the response from the server, so the movies object is still set as null. And the next action is when the server responds, sends us the response with the movies object. So that brings us to the movies loaded state. The movies loaded state, we set the loading flag back to false because we are no longer waiting for a response from the server. We got the response. and we set the movies object to the movie data we get from the server. So this is the state machine of our movie app. Okay, so let's talk about actions and action creators. We talked before that component can change the state of our app with actions. Actions are plain JavaScript objects, and those objects contain a type, which is the type of action, which is a string, and contains a payload, which is a data we send with the action. So action is object. So what is action creator? Action creator is simply a function that returns an action object. So how does a simple function can change the state of our app? Simply by calling store.dispatch with the action creator. We said the store contains the state of our app. So calling store.dispatch with a parameter of action creator will get the action creator to the reducer, and this will change the state of our app. Okay, so we said actions can return a simple object of type and a payload containing data of the action. But what happens if we want to create an async action, like the action we want in our movie app, to query a server and wait for a response? So action creator can actually also be work async, and to do that, the action creator needs to return a function. Our function will receive the store dispatch function as a parameter, and we can change the state by calling the dispatch method after we get the response from the server. A simple example would be to set an async action that works with set timeout. So in here, we have a simple example of an action creator that works in an async way. So that action creator is called change state async sample, and it returns a function. That function gets a dispatch from the store, the dispatch method from the store, and then we're going to call set timeout, and after the timeout reaches the function, we can call the dispatch we got here, we can call the dispatch with another action creator. So this is basically how you do an async action creator. Of course, you also have to apply a certain middleware to the store, which we will cover later when we talk about our store. Okay, let's try to practice about action and action creators in our movie app. Let's try to do a small exercise with action and action creators. So in our movie app, as we said in the previous slide, we have three actions. An action that changed the loading variable in the state, and it's called when the user hits the search button. We have an action that changed the movie object in the state, and that's called when we receive the response from the movie API. And we also have an action that requests data from the movie API server. So go back to the Hello World component project we created earlier and add a file called actions.js with these three actions described above. Also, don't forget to add the actions.js file in the index file. Pause the video and try it yourself. After you finish, you have the solution for this task in the branch feature actions. Good luck. Okay, let's check the solution for the action task of the movie app. So in our index file, we added the actions.js script. And in the actions.js script, you can see we have action creators, which are simply simple functions that return an action object. So we have a function called toggleLoading, which changes the state of the isLoading flag. So this action creator returns a simple action. We set the type of the action as toggle loading, as a string toggle loading, and we set the payload of the action as the isLoading argument we get in the function. So we can use action creator toggle loading to set to true or false the isLoading state. We also have an action creator called setMovie to set the movie object. So this returns also an action object with type string setMovie, and we have a payload of the movie we are passing our action creator. And the third action we have is our async action, which is request movie from API. This action creator gets a search string, which is the search we input in our movie form search field. And this action creator is async, so it needs to return a function, and this function gets a dispatch, the store dispatch method. And the first thing we're going to do with the dispatch is toggle the loading state to true. That means we're setting the isLoading flag to true before we do the request to the server. And then we do a simple AJAX request to our OpenMovie database API. And when this is resolved, we dispatch the setMovie, we set the movie object, and we also toggled our loading state to false. So as you can see, our actions file is a simply action creators simple functions which returns basically simple object mostly, and when async returns a function. So the actions file is pretty simple file. Let's talk about reducers. We mentioned earlier actions, which actions are simple object with the type of action, which is a string, and the payload of an action, which is the data the action is transferring forward. Well, actions describe basic data, but they don't describe how the state will change. So to determine how the state will change, we have to know the previous state and the action with the type and payload. And from this information, we have to understand how the next state will look like. And this is the job for the reducers. Reducers get the state of the app, and they get an action, and they determine what the next state will look like. The reducer is usually a function with a switch case statement for every action. Also in the reducer, we defined our initial state. So when our app launches, our Redux app launches for the first time, it will send an undefined state for the reducer, and the reducer will need to define the initial state when it gets an undefined as a state. Let's practice what we learned about reducers. And let's add the reducer file for our movie app. In our movie app, add a reducer.js file, and this file will contain our initial state in our reducer. So try and create this file now. Don't forget to add it in the index.html. Pause the video and try it yourself. After you finish, we will present the solution. Good luck. So this is how our reducer file will look like. We define our initial state inside the reducer, and the initial state of our movie app has a loading flag set to false and a movie object set to null. Now I define the reducer function. Now, small remark, we put the reducer function in a global variable called reducer. Now the reducer is a global variable defined in index.html here. I have something important to note. This is not best practices for React Redux, and I can't emphasize that enough. It's usually not how it's done. Usually you have Webpack and ESX and JSX combined with Webpack, which allows you to use import and export in your files. But since this video is for educational purposes and tried to emphasize how Reducer works, how Action works, how Store works, this is how I chose to do it. So I know it's not best practices, but for this video, to simplify things and to focus on Redux and how Redux works, I chose to use global variables for that purpose. So returning back to our reducer function. Our reducer function gets a state and gets an action. The state is the current state of our app. The action is the action that is currently being activated. A reducer usually looks like a big switch statement, where we do a switch on the type of action we're receiving. For example, we received the toggle loading action, and we have to return, when we get it, the new state of our app. So we're returning an object, and we're basing our object on the current state of the app. And from that, and from the toggle loading action, we use the payload and we determine the new state of the app. For example, toggle loading will create a new object based on the current state of the app, but it will replace the isLoading state with action.payload. setMovie will do something similar. We'll create an object from the state and replace the movie in the state with the action payload. And the default happens when we don't have, when basically we get it undefined in the state. And in this case, we're just returning the initial state of our app. So a reducer is a simple function with which gets a state and an action, and using a switch statement, it creates the next state of our app. Let's talk about Redux Store. As we mentioned earlier, in Redux app, we have a single source of truth, our state, which is located in our store. You can get the state by calling getState, a method in the store. You can also change the state by calling the state method dispatch and passing as argument an action creator that will change the state. Redux library provides us with createStore, which is a method that can create a Redux store. That method receives as first argument our reducer. You can also have multiple reducers and combine them together. The second argument of our createStore is the initial state of our app, used commonly in server-side rendering. Server-side rendering also need to create a store to render the app on the server side, and that store need to set the initial state of the app. Our store needs to support async actions, so we need to apply a middleware to our store to support that. There is a middleware called redux-thunk that can make our store support async actions. And in the next exercise, we'll give an example how we apply that middleware also. Okay, let's practice how we create a store with Redux. Create a file and name. In this exercise, you can create a file named store.js. The file will call createStore and pass it the reducer we created in exercise 7. As you recall, in exercise 7, we created a reducer and we set it in a global variable so we can pass it on to the store. Also, apply to the store the redux-thunk middleware to enable async actions. Pause the video and try it yourself. After you finish, check out the solution in the branch feature store. Good luck. Okay, let's try and work together how we create a Redux store. So let's first open our index.html file. As you can see, we included some extra libraries in our index.html file. We have here a library called React Redux, which is a library that connects Redux to React framework. You see below it we included a Redux library, which is the general Redux library, and also we included redux-thunk that we can apply to our store and support async actions. Also, examining our global variables, you see the global reducer variable we set in the previous exercise, and we also added a store global variable. We want to save our store as a global variable. Once again, global variables are not the recommended way. Go to Google, type React Redux starter kits, and check out the cool, very highly supported and highly popular starter kits available. Okay, moving to our store.js file. Defining our store is quite simple. We have our store global variable. We want to save the store and use it in other places. So we're saving it as a global variable. And we have a Redux global global name since we included the Redux library. And we can apply middleware, which is a Redux function to apply middleware to a store. And we're going to apply the redux-thunk. To apply the redux-thunk, we're going to apply it to our store, to our create store. And we're going to pass our create store applied with redux-thunk. We're going to pass it our reducer. So the final result is a store that supports async action with a reducer. And just to check that everything works properly, I logged the store get state. I want to see that in here I get the state of our initial state of the app. So let's check out what we're getting. Let's reload. You see we are logging an object with is loading false and movie null, which is exactly the initial state of our app. So everything is working. Okay, let's try to connect our store reducer in action with our movie app flow by creating components. Our components will respond to user events like clicking the search submit button and start the entire flow of our app. So the following exercise, you will have to create a file named components.js. In this file, you will have a render function which creates the movie form search, our component form, which includes a text field and a submit button. And you have to attach an event for the form submission. And that event will simply print the text the user typed in the search field. You can attach ref in the text field and use this.refs to refer to a DOM object in the render component, in the render function. So you can attach ref to the text field in the form and grab the value by referring this.refs. So pause the video, try it yourself. You have the solution in feature/search form, and good luck. Okay, let's check our components JavaScript file. And you can see here we created a component called search form. It extends React component. That's how we define a React component. In this React component, we're defining a constructor, calling the parent constructor. We want to bind this with the search submitted method. So the search submitted method will have a reference to this.refs. A search submitted method is the event that is called when the user submits the search form. And the first thing we are doing is grabbing the search string from refs. We're referring ref with the name search string, since this is the name we put in our search text field. We put a ref with the value search string, which means by referring this ref's search string, I'm referring the DOM element of the text field here. So I can refer to the DOM element by doing this ref search string and then take the value of that DOM element. And then I'm printing in a pop-up this search string, and I want to prevent the default from happening, since I want this form to do nothing. I don't want for the page to reload. And in a render method, we are returning a JSX with a div, and in this div we have a form. We're attaching an event to the onSubmit event of this form, and the event will call the search submitted method above. We're adding a text field for the search. This text field will have a ref, so we can refer to it in the search submitted method. And we're adding a submit button. We're also using ReactDOM to render our component. We are rendering search form, and we're rendering it in the DOM getElementById example. So this is basically a simple component. Let's check how it looks in the browser. So in the browser it looks like this. We have the text field and we have the submit button, and we're gonna print hello world, click submit. There's an alert with hello world. Okay, let's do another small exercise, and this time we're gonna use the Redux provider. So we created a Redux Store. We need to make that store available to all our components. So React Redux supplies with a provider. We wrap our app with the provider, and the provider is in charge of making the store available to all our components. So inside your DOM render function, wrap our components with the provider component. The provider component needs to receive the Redux store we created earlier. So you try to do it yourself, and you have the solution in feature wrap provider. Good luck. Okay, so this was a very simple task. Simply in the components.js file, we have our react.dom.render method, and we're gonna wrap it in the React Redux provider and pass in the store our global store variable. The result will be pretty similar to the previous result. Okay, now we want to connect everything together. We want to connect our component to the state and to the actions. We want the component to change when some part of the states change, and also the component to activate the actions when the user clicks the search button. So for that, we can use React Redux connect method. The connect method receives two arguments. The first one decides which of the state should pass to the component. It should cause a re-render to the component. And the second decides which of the actions should be transferred to the component properties. And those actions needs to be attached to the store dispatch method. So the first argument returns a function. The function receives a state and returns a simple object with keys as the keys that will be similar to the component properties keys, and the values will be the values from the state. The second argument also returns a function. The function gets the store dispatch function and also returns an object with the keys as the keys in the properties that will be mapped to the action creators. And the second value will be action creators connected to the dispatch, to the store dispatch. To connect an action creator to the store dispatch, we can use bind action creators, and that's located in the React Redux library. Now, our cert component will re-render when the state that the component is connected to will change. Okay, let's try finalizing everything we learned and connect our component and finish our movie app. So let's do a small exercise. We'll now connect the search form component we created before, and we'll connect this component to our state and to our action. The search form will be connected to the isLoading flag we put in the state, and also be connected to the movie state object. We'll also connect the component to the request movie from API action. In our component, when the isLoading flag will be set to true, we'll display a loading text, and our submit button will call the request movie from API with the search term the user entered. We'll then get the movie and re-render the component, and whenever we have in the movie state something that is different than null, we'll display the movies we got from the API. So pause the video, try it yourself. You have the solution in the branch feature final, and good luck. Okay, so this is the solution for exercise 11, connecting our search form component to our state and to our actions. So we have our search form component we created in the previous exercises, and when I go down after the component definition, I want to connect our component to our state and to our actions. So I'm first defining map state to props function, which gets a state and return a simple object with the keys that will be available in my object properties, and the value from the state that is mapped to that object, to our component property. So our component will basically have, in the properties, it will have isLoading, which maps to the state isLoading, and movie, which maps to the state movie. Also, it's important to note that Redux will take care of re-rendering our component when the state we connect here are changing their values. Meaning that if we had more states, like more values, and we didn't connect them, if those states would change, it won't cause a re-render. Only states we connect here will cause our component to be re-rendered. So it's really optimizing the speed. You only render the components that actually needs to be re-rendered. Below it, we create a function map dispatch to props to connect our action to our component. And that function gets the store dispatch method, and it returns a simple object, once again with keys, that those keys are mapped to the component property keys. And we use bind action creators to bind the action we want to pass to the dispatch method. Action here is a global variable holding the request movie from API action we created on the actions exercise. This is in the actions.js JavaScript file. So basically what it means is we're passing our search form properties a method that is called request movie from API. This will be available in the search form component. And we are passing action creator action creator, and the action creator that calls the Open Movie Database API, and we're connecting that action creator to our store dispatch method, and this is passed to our component. Now to finalize the connection, we call React Redux connect method, and we pass the two functions we created here, and we are connecting it with our search form. So let's see how it works in our component. So our search form component will now have in its properties this you can call the isLoading state. And you can see here that I have created a function in our JSX that will run, that whenever the isLoading is true, will output a div with a loading text. Also, you can see below that I created another function that whenever our properties movie object will be different than null, then I will print the title, the actors, and the IMDb rating of the movie I got from the server. Also, in our search submitted event, I'm calling the request movie from API. I now got this action in the property, so I can call it with the search string. And this is it. This is basically our final component. We have our form. The form is has onSubmit event. It calls the search submitted. The search submitted is calling the action we defined, request movie from API. It's sending with the action the search string the user is entered. This action will will cause a state change. Using the reducer, it will change the state. And when the state will change, it will change the isLoading and it will change the movie eventually. And when the state will change, the isLoading or movie will change, it will automatically call again the render method. Our component will re-render and print the result of isLoading true, and after that print the result of the movie. So let's see how it looks in our browser. So we have our search form. Let's enter Batman and we click submit, and we have a loading and then title Batman and the title of the app, the actors, and the IMDb rating. And also type a different name. I think I misspelled it. Yeah. And it gives me the rating of Forrest Gump. Okay, for a conclusion, we'll learn a bit about React and how it works and some tools that's commonly used with React development. We also created a hello world with React. Then we wanted to create something a little more complicated. So we started learning about React and Redux, how they work together, how React can develop app using application architecture called Redux. And we created our movie app. And we did learn about how we connect the state and the actions, about React Store. And a lot of the ways we taught here about React and Redux are not best practices. As I said before, it's highly recommended to use the popular starter kits out there. I'm giving a URL of a starter kit that I recommend using. And also, this lecture is on YouTube and also on our Facebook page. So we publish different articles and lecture on our Facebook page. So feel free to join our community. Thank you very much for listening, and would love if you like the video or give us some feedback about what you want to learn next. Thank you for listening, and see you next lecture.